All right, guys, welcome back to Tomboy Official. Welcome back to the podcast. Um, Today I've got a topic that kind of came to me during work, and I'm sitting here in the stew, kind of vaping on some indica, sipping some black tea, which I probably shouldn't be drinking tea this late in the evening, but whatever. Um, Today's my self-care day. Wednesdays are my self-care day, so those are the days that I mostly do paperwork for work. I don't do anything too intensive, don't run any errands. I'll do side hustle stuff if I feel up to it. But yeah, I don't really run any errands. I don't really do anything. That's usually the day that I'm likely to order like Uber Eats or Instacart and that kind of stuff. So, um, let's get into it. So one topic, I'm looking at the wrong part. A topic that I wanted to discuss is kind of related to identity. So a lot of things, right? So a lot of times we talk about, sexual identity, gender identity, and we maybe kind of stop there with the identifying and kind of what does this definition mean and who would you be attracted to and who do you date and all these things. But I think, it kind of came to my attention that it's kind of more nuanced than that. Like I was listening to a podcast, or no, it was a YouTube episode of, I don't know, it was probably on like one of those like Vice type channels or something like that. And this episode was talking to different like female born people who were describing kind of like how they identify. Some said queer, some said dyke, some said gay, some said, that they have like disability status or that they were like they put fat or like different racial or ethnic things in their identities. Like there was really no wrong answer, but it was just kind of like an introductory question. And some people were saying like, oh, like my driver's license has an F for like, because they were born a female, but this was like a trans male older gentleman with like a gray beard. Let me see if I can find my history here. Let's see what I was actually watching. Let me see, because Kate Monig was in it too. Queer people 16 to 65 talk about identity, and it's from the channel Cut, CUT. It's 7 minutes 8 seconds long for that video. So I was watching that and kind of more listening, but kind of a little like looking at it somewhat. But I was mostly just listening to them as work was wrapping up, and I was kind of getting ready to kind of head out the door. So I was like, okay, let me check this out. And yeah, that kind of came to my mind about, like we do talk about gender identities a lot. We talk about sexual identities a lot, and then within those identities, there's a lot of other like categories of subcategories. But I don't only want to talk about those categories because I'm not really gonna list like every single subcategory possible, but just some of them. And then mostly talking about kind of the dynamics that those different identities create, or different things that kind of come up for a person, different roles they might have, whether that's personal, they have different roles, or based on like their own internal preferences or societal roles, or like interpersonal kind of, you might have different roles based on kind of how you present, how you identify, Um, and some of these roles are based on norms, and other ones are kind of like maybe more personalized. Like it just happens to be that certain people just might happen to feel this way. Um, and so when we talk about, different gender identities, a lot of times we talk about, the spectrum. I mean, I'm not gonna label every single one because there's so many. But people have heard of non-binary. People have heard of like gender queer, maybe. People have heard of, um, I guess. Let me see. I guess intersex would be in that category too. Um, because intersex people are born with, sex characteristics that are, um, male or female, kind of like a combination to some extent. But I think, an intersex person can still identify their own gender however they feel like. They don't necessarily have to be like, oh yeah, I'm intersex, or, that's their own personal business. Um, or even um, like, yeah, just like cisgender people, cisgender males, cisgender females, and trans people, um, trans males, trans females, and like, yeah, there's a lot of in between types of subcategories, right? Um, and with those types of categories, you might have like a sexual identity as well, like gay or lesbian or queer or questioning or bisexual or pansexual or demisexual or, um, heterosexual. There's just so many, gay. There's so many different types of, ways that people can identify. But within those as well, there are also additional identities, right? So like if we've heard about things like, otters or bears or, femmes or mask or studs or tomboys, or, there's just so many different, um dykes, or, like, I don't know, there's just so many different, um ways that people can identify. Some of them are more formal. When I say formal, I mean kind of more um, like, and this, I don't know, cause so okay, so maybe you guys can tell me what you think about this. So, say for example, this is something that's real for me at my job, right? So it's optional. You don't have to put your, sexuality or your gender, like say in your email or in your Zoom. You know, you don't have to put like your name and your gender, but it's kind of, we kind of do, um, we have been encouraged to use our pronouns if we want to. We can put our pronouns on our, on our, um, on our screen, like where it has your name. Like if you ever use Zoom or Teams or anything like that, you probably notice it has like a space where it's like your name or your phone number or whatever it is that you're logging in from. And you can edit that too. And we also have our emails, where a lot of people have in their email like a professional description. At the end of every email, it has like their full name, their, work address, site, the site that they work for, their, um, title, and, we're allowed to, encouraged but not necessarily like pressured, but encouraged to write our we can write our sexuality. Mostly they would encourage more of like pronouns. Like, I don't know that many people who put like their sexuality on there. There are a lot of, I've noticed there are more like hetero people who have like their sexuality and pronouns on there. Hetero cis people that do. And then not everybody does though. And so we have those kind of aspects of our job that, you know, are, I mean, I appreciate that those are options that we get. But that's what I mean by kind of more not necessarily professional, but more like yeah, they're kind of more like what you would use like in the working world or in, you know, just describing your identity and things like that. And then there are other aspects that, you know, you don't really see people put like boy, like BOI, or dyke, or bear, or, you know, other kinds of things like that that you just kind of don't really see people putting. But that kind of describes things a little further. And I kind of wonder why people don't put that. I mean, I don't know if it would be considered unprofessional. Like if I was to say that I was like a queer, lesbian, tomboy dyke or something like that, I mean, that's not necessarily how I identify, but if I were to identify as such, I mean, would that be appropriate to put on like my work email? You know, I could say that, you know, if you put queer or lesbian, then yeah, but then there's some other terms that are kind of maybe not so always so acceptable. It kind of like, and I don't know why that is. Like maybe it kind of like assumes like it kind of, I mean, like, because when you're talking about, you know, sexuality, it still does kind of like assume a sexual preference. But I guess if you're saying things like bear or otter or boy or different sorts of terms, it seems like those are kind of like more towards like body image or like cultural, kind of like a cultural inclination towards certain things, or just maybe how you present as well. I don't really know. Maybe like the presentation related type of terminology isn't really as, not acceptable, but like it's just kind of interesting to me that like hetero people don't really have that much of terminology. Like you hear people say stuff like tomboy, tomgirl. You kind of hear people say like effeminate or masculine. But yeah, with cisgender hetero people, you don't really hear a whole lot of that terminology that you hear in the queer community, which is interesting to me. Like females don't really talk about like, oh, are they like masc or femme or like kind of like stemish or like what, like they don't really like say anything. But I mean they exist, like they do kind of have that kind of those same qualities as the non-straight people would have. I mean like those types of, I guess, qualities of a person aren't really determined by their gender identity or their sexual identity. So it is kind of interesting that you don't really see people outside of the queer community really using those kind of terms too much. Like I mentioned, you'll see like tomboy or something like that, but you won't really see like a whole lot of other terms. And a lot of times too, I mean, tomboys are even usually considered or expected or like predicted to not be straight people, and that kind of thing. So it is kind of interesting to me. That's just kind of something that just kind of came to my mind. It's like, that's interesting. They don't do that. Um, there's probably a reason, but I mean, like, they just maybe just don't. One thing I've noticed too, like they kind of assume roles. I think maybe more than people in the queer communities would. I feel like straight people kind of assume roles. Um, maybe everybody does, but it's like, and I'm not necessarily talking like top and bottom, not necessarily, but um, so let's kind of dive into this a little bit more. So, with all the different identities that we have, that we can talk about, I mean, there's so many, right? And I might have to break these down a little bit, because there's like so much going on here. Um, so I guess one that would be easiest for me to start with would be a STEM. And so the reason why I would start with STEM is because that's kind of more, the podcast is called Tomboy Official. Um, so along those lines, a STEM would be someone who might present a little bit tomboyish, kind of has more of a like androgyny about them, kind of some masculine qualities, some feminine qualities, like not like, I don't want to say too as in there's a way to have too much, but not like super intensive mask and not like super intensive femme, just kind of like more in the middle. But they do tend to have kind of more of a mask presenting side, more so that would be um more obvious than the femme presenting side. Um, usually, or like that might just like stand out more, like somebody wearing a skirt with like basketball sneakers and like a basketball jersey, something like that. It's like, it's not always like dress style, but it can be like attitude, dress style, clothing style, preferences of like how to dress, how somebody presents. I mean, just because somebody's dressing a certain way doesn't necessarily mean that's what they prefer. Just because somebody presents a certain way doesn't mean that that's what they identify as, or that that's what they prefer. Sometimes people do things for their own safety, for their own comfort, for, the comfort of people around them. If they feel like they might experience ridicule, they might still have a preference to dress a certain way. I think a lot of us who are kind of more on the mask, or have some mask qualities, who were born females, um, we kind of do have that, kind of like a lot of us kind of grew up with a childhood of people kind of discovering that, okay, we're just not going to want to wear the dresses and the makeup and stuff. Um, and a lot of us kind of went through a time period in youth where, maybe we couldn't afford our own clothes or weren't allowed to shop the way we wanted to. So there was this kind of disconnect between like what's available to me, what the adults around me are going to allow me to do, versus what do I actually want to do, what feels authentic to me. A lot of us kind of realized that early on, that we're like, hey, I have all these like mass qualities and all these mass kind of preferences that aren't really getting met. And not only is it something that you might have wanted to explore, but it's also being told that you're also often, a lot of us were kind of told that either it was like a temporary state, and that like when you actually grow up or when you mature, you're not going to want those mask things anymore, or people were trying to like talk us out of it. Like, you don't want to dress like that. You're never going to get a boyfriend. People are going to look at you funny. Like different kinds of ideas that were either said or that we kind of thought, or were made to think, that kind of made us kind of notice, hey, I'm kind of different than a lot of people. And so, I just, kind of bring all those things up because it's like, that's pretty much how we, how we were raised, a lot of us, not everybody. I mean, there are a lot of people who were raised with family members who were completely accepting, completely openly like ready to like let us just like explore our own nature and do what we felt was genuine for ourselves and not really be too concerned. But others of us were kind of like encouraged to not do things that weren't typical in our societies. But I do think it is pretty typical in society for people to have these kind of different preferences, different identities. Kind of, there's a lot of spectrums to a lot of things that we're not really told about. So, yeah, like if you think about stems, if you think about kind of like a softer flavor of masculinity in a female born person, but usually this is like referring to usually it's referring to non-straight females. I've never heard a straight cis female refer to themselves as a stem. I've heard them say tomboy. I've never heard them say stem. And it's kind of like I wonder why. I think the term STEM comes from stud and femme. So stud is different from butch, is different from dyke. A stud is usually a more masculine presenting like black female born person, and sometimes even Latinos or Latinx or Latinas get kind of roped into that category too, but overall it's usually implying black. Butch seems like it's more of a general term, but it's usually assumed white or not black. I've heard of black people say butch, and I know a lot of white people say stud as well, but it's not really. It seems like it's more of a recent thing that I've seen, like with TikTok or like around in social media, a lot of white people referring to themselves as studs, but it is kind of one of those controversial kind of topics where it's like, wait, what? Like how come they're using this term when it's, you know, it's assuming a black person, but I don't really know. I think a lot of these things are just, someone's always going to be offended by one thing or another. Someone's always going to say, okay, this is right, it's okay. Someone's always going to be against it. I try not to really be too opinionated on things. Maybe it's an evolution of things that we're seeing. Maybe it's something else that we're seeing. I mean, I can just think in general in black culture, there is a lot of history of, things that, and I didn't come up with this explanation. Somebody else, I heard this somewhere else. I think on the Bad Queers podcast, they were talking about how, like black culture kind of comes up with a lot of stuff, and then everyone else kind of embraces it, whether that's hip hop and like the style of the clothing or certain sports or certain slang. A lot of different things like that come from black culture, and then they just kind of get adopted by everybody else. And so maybe this is something that we're seeing too, even in like the queer spaces. Maybe there are, some black queer related topics that are getting embraced by other people. And I'm not here to say like do it, don't do it, like whatever. Like I mean, I'm a black person, but I don't really know what the white people who say that they're studs, like I don't really know their perspective on why they're using the term. Is it like, is there like a reason why they're using it? I mean, I don't really know, but it is interesting to see. And it is interesting, I think, just culturally in general, when we talk about gender, and we talk about these different sorts of terms and roles and identities. Like when we're talking about stems, I notice, and I'm going to break this into different parts. So when we're talking about stems, there is kind of that embracing of more of a spectrum of different gender related things. A STEM still might have different, might present. A lot of it is kind of about like an identity, like how someone self-identifies, but then also presentation. So usually you don't see a lot of people like ultra femmed out saying that they're stems. Like they're not going to always be, and this is a stereotype too, but they're probably not going to always be in like heels, a dress, like all like super made up with nails and all this kind of makeup and everything. Like they're not usually going to be like super femmed out like that every day, all the time. But I mean, what if it's like 50% of the time, does it still count as STEM? If they're dressed up like that, like 99% of the time, and then maybe like only holidays they dress in like more masculine presenting clothing, otherwise all femme looking styles, would they still be able to say they're STEM? So it's those kinds of things that are like, I think it is an individual person saying, okay, this is what I say about myself. But then a lot of times too, other people look from the outside and they kind of label too. And so like something I got a lot when I was younger and even older was people just saying, oh, you're a tomboy, oh, you're a tomboy, oh, you're a tomboy. And that's kind of why I embraced that title for this podcast, is because people all my life were saying you're a tomboy, you're a tomboy, you're a tomboy. And I never really called myself a tomboy. I mean, I knew that I had definitely some masculine qualities that I just was very comfortable with, way more than other people were comfortable with me having. I remember that. Like, it bothered people, to some people, like, it took a while for my parents to stop buying me, like, dresses for Christmas and stuff like that. It took a while, like, if my mom would go shopping, it took a while for her to like stop buying me stuff that I clearly wasn't gonna wear. My sister, shout out to my sister, she was very instrumental in that in that role of helping my mother get a little better with shopping for me for holidays and gifts and stuff, because she was just like, yeah, she's not gonna wear that, like, and my mom, eventually was kind of like, I think that's one of the reasons why my mom eventually kind of got on the same page. She still has to yet really buy me any really kind of mask brand or even male stereotypical clothing, really. But she kind of, like, even during Christmas, she gave me like sweats and she's like, yeah, I know you like kind of looser fitted stuff, but it's kind of all right. But I mean, she didn't buy me like a dress or like a bright pink, like fluffy, lacy thing. I mean, every now and then they'll still give me like Victoria's Secret, like gift cards, or like, Victoria's Secret stuff or whatever. Like, I don't mind it. I'm not like against it. that kind of stuff. So I don't know. I just, yeah, it's just kind of one of those things that, you might have the role, like you might have all the kind of like the appearance or the preference for how you would like to appear. A lot of times those things might not really match up. Um, so you can also have the like a STEM usually has roles where they would be, in a relationship. They might not have too many clear expectations of them, because they kind of do usually embody these like masculine and feminine qualities. A lot of times people might not place a lot of either qualities on them, but because I would say overall they still do kind of shine bright, on the mask side, because they're female born people who, do kind of embody both qualities, but you usually notice the mask side more than the femme side. You just kind of notice like a softened mask. Um, like for example, I think I've explained this before. Like I'll wear button ups, but usually they're like floral and they're like bright. Like I like pinks and purples and like bright kind of Easter pastel type colors and stuff like that. Um, in guys' clothing. And so, like, I've never really worn like a suit with a tie, but if I did, I'm pretty sure it would be quite colorful. It wouldn't be like a black, like just a black tie, like, or like I would want something a little more festive and fun. Um, you know, I think Ash, Hardell mentioned too on their channel. So Ash is um, I want to say Ash identifies as a trans male. Please don't quote me on that because I haven't been on that channel in a really long time. But Ash did go through a top surgery portion, and transitioning portion of their kind of online career, um, when they talked about it more, and had a lot of content about the whole process they were going through. And I kind of watched that channel develop from a certain point, um, from where I think Ash identified as like kind of more tomboyish, kind of had some dysphoria about having longer hair and the ponytail. I remember when Ash kind of cut the ponytail and started wearing shorter hair and was really like excited about that. Um, and started talking about like, getting the top surgery and the whole process and the hormones and the therapy and all the whole process that they went through, as well as other things about their relationship, their partner going through things, and then also clothing styles, clothing preferences, underwear, lingerie, sex toys, that kind of stuff. So I really liked that channel had like a lot of information that wasn't necessarily like super, it wasn't like super duper gendered information. It was very like approachable for people who either have a partner or have an interest in somebody who is, not cisgender or not like on opposite poles of the gender spectrum, or has different kind of like presentations. That channel does have a lot of like ways of like looking at different sorts of concepts of presentation, such as like hair and clothing, underwear, certain things that like you don't really see people talk about a lot. um so when you think about like hair and stems, usually their hair doesn't necessarily need to look like a certain length. or a certain style. Like I've seen stems with braids, I've seen stems with with braids, with dreads, with bald shaved heads, with a buzz cut, with kind of like spiky hair, with short hair, with somewhere in between, with like maybe half of that side of the head shaved and the other half long. Um, all sorts of different styles. And a lot of times their presentation, again with the clothing, whether that's underwear or outer clothing, might have a mixture of like masc and femme type of clothing, accessories, if that's makeup or not. Maybe have their nails done, maybe not. Um, might have some hobbies that are kind of like more stereotypical masculine hobbies, maybe some femme hobbies too. And again, these are all like stereotypical things. I can't really just say this is how all stems are. Um, but stems do kind of like walk that kind of middle path with a lot of things. Their roles aren't like super predictable. Like you would know for a fact what type of clothes they're gonna wear this week, all this week, every day this week versus next week. Versus if you compare to like a stud or like a femme, usually the stud or the mask presenting, butch person would be likely to wear like more mask clothing. Probably most of the time that would be their preference, versus a femme that most of the time they would prefer to wear like more femme styles. Um, and then different stressors that could be attached to stems. I think um, different stressors I've heard about. I mean, definitely just that they have those mass qualities in general. Um, I mean, those that can be a little challenging, but then like they might have roles that aren't like too set in stone with people that they know. Like people might be able to be more flexible with how they approach a STEM because their flexibility can basically be. I hate when people come apart right next to me. Their flexibility can basically be kind of like based on um um I lost my train of thought. Oh man. Hmm. Yeah. Okay. Um. Yeah. I get distracted by cute people. Um. Anyways, I have no idea what I was saying. Um. Yeah, the stressors might be different from someone who's like a stud versus like a femme. Um. And basically, um, the stressors might just come from just um yeah, mostly having like the mask qualities. um Stressors also from like society and then like internal pressure. um and there can be some dynamics that come up. So a lot of times, and we're gonna assume that when we say STEM, this person isn't a heterosexual person. um Now, people with STEMish type qualities do exist in the hetero world, but I'm just going to keep it as this person isn't hetero, just because I don't really hear a lot of hetero people referring to themselves as certain terms. We're going to assume that they're not hetero. So with that, comes its own set of stressors, as it is, just from not being a heterosexual person, likely. But we can't really predict what this person identifies as far as their sexuality, we would assume, because usually this term is used for female-born people who generally identify as female, maybe non-binary. I mean, people can identify however they want to identify, so I want to be cautious in being like, oh yeah, there's not a person on earth that's like a gay male that refers to themselves as a STEM. Like, I don't know. I mean, they might be out there. I personally don't know anyone who identifies that way that's a male, or a non-binary person, but I also don't have a huge enough sample size to really choose from. Actually, I don't think I even know any gay females, any lesbians, any non-binary people. I don't think I know anybody personally in my life that identifies as a STEM, who would just say like, "Oh yeah, I'm a STEM." There are people that I would look at and like, if somebody were to ask me to describe them, I'd be like, "Oh, she's kind of STEMish." But I don't know if there's anybody specifically who identifies as STEM. When I think about like Amber's Closet, I think Amber's Closet has mentioned that she considers herself a STEM. And there are some other like YouTubers that I know mention that they're STEMs. But I don't really hear people use that word too much. I hear people say a lot that they're, female, mask presenting female, masculine of center. I've heard that more often. Or people just using their pronouns, but I'm not here to say like don't use that or whatever. I'm just saying like, just from what I notice, from what I observe, those are the things that are things I've seen more often. I mean, things I've seen more often. So there is, yeah, I mean, the dynamics in the relationships, if the person is a STEM, I don't think that they would have a lot of expectations placed on them, other than that they're gay or queer or maybe bi, lesbian. Usually that, yeah, I think the expectations would be leaning towards being gay or not straight. I don't think STEMs are always really held to like a like stereotypical masculine expectations. Maybe somewhat, but not probably as much as like butch or someone who's like ultra mask, or studs. I don't think so, but yeah. And then there's society. So we've talked a little bit about society, about like what society expects, kind of. Usually people notice it more when they're younger, or if they live in an environment like a country, a city, a state, an area. Maybe it's a more rural area, or just like some area where you might live, or some job that you might have. Usually when people have, that's for like every identity, I would say. When people have an environment that they work in where they can't just kind of be themselves, or an environment where they live in where they can't just kind of be themselves, but they have certain preferences for their own authenticity, like those might not be embraced by everybody. And that's kind of almost what I was trying to get at when I was mentioning that like my job has like made it clear that we can, write info about our pronouns or sexual identities and stuff like that, but not everybody does. Not everybody's expected to. Nobody's really pressuring it, but it's still considered acceptable, and it's kind of their way of being like, okay, like we're not so closed-minded that you can't even put this stuff. I mean, like, you know, um they're getting there. They're getting there. But that's just a small step, but um I'd say my job has a lot more equality than a lot of different jobs might actually let on to. And also, there might be like people having like internal, kind of like an internal or personal type of experience with things. So what that would look like is, again, that actually is, it can mean that your environment isn't, your whole environment or part of your environment isn't really accepting, if it's like on a stressor level, or they might be accepting and it probably wouldn't be a stressor too much, or it can be internal, like you yourself may or may not be accepting of you yourself as being like a STEM or something like that. Something kind of, someone kind of like in between. You might not really have that that comfort with it, and that might be a personal thing that's going on. You might have an environment that even like accepts you, but you might not be like confident in it for multiple reasons. Maybe you had like a religious training, or were taught some values that like discriminated against kind of who you are, and maybe even if you don't live in an environment like that, you might still have some internalized ideas of why you don't want to live it out, like present, and why you might not want to present in the way that you kind of authentically feel. So, you might not actually present the way that you identify yourself, for multiple reasons. I mean, you don't have to. You don't have to, like, if somebody says, oh, I'm STEM, it doesn't mean like, oh, I have to like dress a certain way or not dress a certain way just because I'm claiming this identity. But it is very complex. So as far as with STEMs, that's kind of what I had to say. I do want to talk more about studs and other types of like identities too around the same level. But for now, I'm going to cut this episode, and I'll get the other recordings out too. I hope you guys like the stuff I've posted. I've got some ranty episodes that I've posted. Sometimes I'm literally just recording and hanging out, and whatever comes out of my mouth is whatever comes out. So I had an experience with that pretty recently, and I posted up about it, and I hope it's okay for people to listen to it. In that episode, I described that I was looking for a certain like I was actually speaking on another topic, and then got like quite off topic onto a whole different that came into a whole different a whole different topic, because I had so much other stuff on my mind. I just couldn't get it off my mind. And that was fine too. Like, it didn't need to really go any other way. But the topic I was going to record on, I didn't really fully record on that topic because I was so busy just writing my own well, yeah, just like recording about my own interest at that time. So I hope that's okay with you guys, though. Literally, sometimes I just want to hang out on here, talk, record stuff, post it. It's not always smooth. I try to keep it pretty raw. I don't edit that much. And I hope you guys like that I don't edit that much. I think you can kind of tell a lot about me by just that I don't edit. I do care a lot for the quality. I just would rather have it to be raw if I'm driving, because that's when I have the energy to record and I'm recording, or if I'm recording somewhere out in public and getting a little quiet or stop talking because there's people around, or I feel like they might be overhearing some personal thing that I'm trying to record and I don't really want. I mean, it's kind of weird. I'd rather post some personal topic on the internet for people who I assume are wanting to listen to it versus being for example, in a parking lot at Best Buy, and I'm recording an episode and talking about gay this and gay that, and having the person who's parked next to me trying to find their navigation on their phone, and I'm over here talking about queer sex and stuff. And so it's kind of I kind of don't, even though it's I'm never gonna see these people again, I'd still kind of just, I don't know, I'm kind of shy. I'm not really trying to draw attention to myself. And I know that some of the topics I do discuss, they're topics that if somebody overhears you, they're going to want to kind of maybe listen a little bit. I'm not talking about mathematical theory and I mean, I think that would be interesting too, but I don't know anything about it really. But anyways, longest outro ever. I'm going to keep recording. I hope you guys like this episode, and thanks for listening.